Hello and welcome back to another Thoughts Per Episode Classic Doctor Who edition. Today we will be talking about the final William Hartnell serial, The 10th Planet, which I have been deathly curious about for a while now. It's worth reminding people that it is my personal choice to just stick with what's available on iPlayer because they do tend to have most things, although a couple of serials have apparently gone missing since I started doing this, which is not cool. But yes, I'm aware that we're skipping over The Smugglers, which would happen to be the one and only full Hartnell serial, which includes Ben and Polly as companions, which is kind of a shame to see because it would be cool to see their dynamic, but hopefully I get to see a little bit of that within the 10th Planet. It's also about 17th century Cornish pirates, the missing episode is anyway, and I'm like, I don't think that's too dire of an episode to be skipping. As a Devonshire boy myself, though, I would be curious to hear their accents. "Who are me doctor, is it?" I'm sorry, let's just get on with the 10th Planet. Interestingly, the final part of the 10th Planet is animated, so it must be lost media. In fact, most of Season 4 of Doctor Who is animated recreations of lost media, so we better get used to it. Oh, and it's worth mentioning ahead of time because I keep talking about proto-Cybermen. I do know the 10th Planet introduces the Cybermen and I'm very excited to see it. I'm not expecting much of an original score for this episode, but in my head I will be going bum 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 bum. The 10th Planet Part 1. Okay, so watching this through is super cool. It's like when I go and watch like a famous movie like Alien or something for the first time, and a bunch of my assumptions are challenged, and I go, oh, I didn't realize this was this way. For instance, every time I saw the name The 10th Planet, I always assumed it was going to be like beyond the orbit of Pluto. I didn't expect it to be a visiting planet that would mess with orbits and gravity and stuff. I do wonder how it visited, how it showed up. I'm guessing the Cybermen like figured out how to pilot the world or something. I also didn't realize it was going to be like an upside down version of Earth. I'm pretty sure that's what it is because they're like, I recognize all these continents, but they're slightly wrong somehow. And it's like, yeah, they look like they're upside down. The Doctor says that this as yet unnamed planet is a twin planet to Earth from millions of years ago, which is some interesting lore. I guess we didn't know all that much about planet formation back in the 60s because what are the chances that we would have a mirror planet, I guess? Also, I do like that this story takes place in the far-flung year of 1986. We're in the future now, guys. And of course, in the far-flung year of 1986, we have plenty of trips to the moon and to Mars as well. Why not? That first human colony on Mars, back in the waters of Mars during David Tennant's era, yeah, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, era-shifty. Don't worry about it. The past can be rewritten, and I guess it gets rewritten by the real past. Okay, so a few things I noticed throughout this episode. At one point, the Doctor yells, "Speak up, I'm deaf." That's a new, thing. I don't think the Doctor's ever been deaf before. I mean, I'm saying this like this is sequentially after all of the modern Who stuff. You know what I mean? I think because obviously now this is the serial where William Hartnell regenerates into Patrick Troughton. Spoiler alert. I think now we can say without a doubt this line is intentional foreshadowing to be like, yeah, the Doctor's getting old. His body is aging. He's about... I mean, I don't know why he regenerates. I always just kind of assumed it was old age. Maybe it's not, but still. And yes, I know going deaf doesn't mean that you're about to die of old age. Don't worry, I know. But it's traditionally associated, oh god, associated with old age, and I don't think he's been deaf in previous episode, or maybe he has, and I just don't remember because I've taken 3 years to get through Hartnell's run. Hey, which is about the time it took in the actual real world timeline. That's cool. Definitely did that on purpose. But yeah, solid opener to a serial. It's got mystery, it's got intrigue, it's got timey-wimey. I do like how sometimes they have to keep it a secret that they're time travelers and space travelers, and then sometimes, like in this episode, they just don't give a shit and it kind of lands them in trouble. The 10th Planet, Episode 2. In this episode, we get to actually meet the Cybermen, which of course is fascinating to me, having been a lifelong fan of New Who, but having never met the classic version of the Cybermen, except for that time in that Fifth Doctor story, which I watched ahead of time, because... Why did I do that again? It was like a Tales of a TARDIS episode, I think. I didn't do a thoughts on for that one. That just reminded me to check which stories have been adapted into Tales of a TARDIS episodes, because I will be watching those versions. Luckily, we're good so far. Anyway, what I found interesting about this initial version of the Cybermen, beside their appearance, because of course I already know what their original appearance looks like thanks to Stephen Moffat, but they're definitely a little bit more human than the Cybermen we meet later on. And of course, this fits into the narrative because they're always talking about upgrading themselves. And it might sound weird to be watching this and to be calling them slightly more human because they are, you know, actively portrayed as being inhuman, right? They don't have emotion, they don't care about the loss of human life, etc., etc. But the Cybermen I know would not march in and have a chinwag, have a chat. They would march in and start upgrading people right there and then, but I guess they don't have the capability to do that yet. But even then, why talk to the humans and tell them that they're going to be taken and upgraded? They don't use the word upgraded yet, by the way, or converted or anything like that. They just say, we will make you like us. We will make you better. We will heal you from emotions. But still, they could just march in and stun everyone and then cart them off and do that. But I suppose that wouldn't make for a very good episode now, would it? Now, something I'm noticing as I'm watching through this serial is that it's definitely darker in tone than a lot of the Doctor Who serials have been. For instance, the astronauts that we're introduced to in the first episode and spend a decent amount of time with do end up dying. And while that might not seem dark by New Who standards, by classic Who standards, I think... maybe it's just because I've spent too much time away from this series, but I feel like people, I guess they do die. I don't know, there's something about the astronauts dying which just struck me as like, whoa, okay, that's kind of dark, kind of shocking. Maybe it was the way in which it was done, like they had the music going and everything and the cameras, and then the cameras cut off and the music stopped dead and everything, and there was just silence in the room. And then feeding into this theme of human emotion versus Cyberman logic, we have the news that the General's son has gone up as an astronaut to try and save those other astronauts, which of course wasn't able to do that. And so now the General has a personal stake in this mission to try and save his son from outer space, and we see the stakes are clearly well written because, like, we've already seen what happens with failure. We already know that the odds are not good, and we have these Cybermen here who do not understand the whole emotion side of things, and I'm sure we're going to explore that entire dynamic a little bit more as we go on. But the General Cutler, he definitely becomes a lot more militant and I guess stressed and unbending when he finds out that his son is up there in space. I kind of think that might be why the European commander chose him to go up in the first place. But yeah, they do survive this initial wave of Cybermen because Ben to the rescue, everyone. Ben's first attempts at heroics didn't go well and he got taken prisoner and thrown in a room. I feel like the Cybermen should have just killed him because they're Cybermen and they don't care about human life, and here you've got an element which is causing them difficulty, so just remove the element, logical thing to do. But I guess these Cybermen aren't quite as cold as the later ones. Ben got thrown into a room with a projector in it, and he used the projector to blind the Cyberman that came in, steal his weapon, and then kill the Cyberman. But the thing I really liked is the thing that makes this show Doctor Who. Ben didn't want to fire that weapon. He got backed up all the way against the wall before he fired. This isn't just some bravado, gung-ho, run around, kill the enemies, save the world kind of a thing. There's more to it than that. And Ben does then sneak into the main room and give the General the weapon, and then the General takes out the other two Cybermen and frees everyone. But even then, Ben feels, you know, I don't know if guilty is the right word, but he feels some way about it, and the General's like, what are you apologizing for? Like, it's fine, we beat them, it's fine. And that just struck me as very Doctor Who. I liked that. Ben's here to go on adventures in space and time, or I guess maybe to try and get back to his own time. We are missing a serial between his introduction and where they are now, so I don't really know where he stands on that whole shindig. I really just used the word shindig. But he's not here to fight aliens and kill them and stuff. Unlike Danny Pink, he's not a soldier. Sorry to flashbang you with a Capaldi reference. I really need to rewatch Peter Capaldi's era because I was super critical of the show back then. I feel like I'd enjoy it more now, but I just couldn't get over how much they hammered the whole Clara, I used to be a soldier thing. Anyway, we'll talk about those episodes in 2052. Oh, before I forget, as a side note, I'm having to watch this with subtitles on because the sound mixing, or maybe just like the boom mic operation or whatever, is awful. You can barely hear the characters sometimes, so hooray for that. Oh, and the cliffhanger for this episode was hundreds of spaceships were approaching Earth. That does sound dire. We'll see what happens. The 10th Planet, Episode 3. Okay, so a lot happens in this episode. Firstly, the Doctor unceremoniously keels over. Obviously, his old age has caught up with him, and a regeneration process has begun, but I think what's interesting about this is we don't see William Hartnell's face at all during this episode. When he keels over, it's shot from the back. When we see him lying in bed, it's shot from the back. I don't think that's William Hartnell. I'd be very curious to look up behind the scenes stuff about this episode when I'm done watching it, because I wonder, like, was this even planned from the beginning of this episode? Were these complications that came up during filming midway through? Because there's not much foreshadowing for this. I gotta say, it is sad to watch as well. It wasn't fun. Another thing that makes me think this wasn't planned is at one point Ben says, "The Doctor told me earlier that if Mundus keeps sucking the energy of Earth dry, it will burn itself out and we will be safe," or something like that. That very much feels like it was a line that was planned for the Doctor to say, because he didn't say it in the previous 2 episodes, unless I missed it. And then the rest of the episode just kind of continues on without him. In terms of the story of the Cybermen invasion itself, though, the General has now become a full-on antagonist. Basically, this episode presents us with a moral quandary of 2 options. The first option is sacrifice the life of his son up in space in order to deal with the Cyberman threat, to fully focus on fighting the Cyberman until Mundus burns itself out. The second option, which the General favours, is wait until his son is in orbit behind the Earth so he is safe, and then fire something called a Z-bomb at Mundus, destroying it and flooding the Earth with radiation, killing countless people. Basically, the 2 options are save the General's son's life, or save many more people on Earth's lives while sacrificing the General's son. I don't necessarily think the situation is as cut and dried as that. I don't know why we have to outright sacrifice the son to focus on fighting the Cybermen, but that is the situation as presented. What I love about this situation is that in the previous episode we saw how the absence of emotion is a dangerous thing. If only logic prevails, it is a dangerous thing. This episode, which does not have the threat of the Cybermen on the ground with us, this episode focuses on the danger of emotion. If there is too much emotion without any logic to balance it, that is also a dangerous thing. Because the General is acting emotionally and in his own self-interest, basically enacting a dangerous plan which is going to kill millions of people because he is worried about the safety of his son. What a fucking fantastically written plot. I love that so much. It's not even overtly, like, spelled out to us or anything, but that is basically what's happening here. And in the middle of this, you've got Ben and Polly and one of the scientists trying to sabotage the spacecraft so that it doesn't launch, because they all know they are able to think logically enough to say, we shouldn't let this Z-bomb get to Mundus because it will cause more harm than good. The path of absolute violence and destruction is not the way to go here. And you know, this coupled with the fact that we saw what happened to the previous astronauts to set the stakes and everything, I thought the 10th Planet was iconic for 2 reasons, because it's William Hartnell's final serial, and because it introduces the Cybermen. But it's also just a fantastic story in its own right. I should have considered that the fact that it introduced the Cybermen is important, because the Cybermen obviously are a returning villain, and they're a returning villain for a reason, and that's because they were written so well, or the story in which they were introduced at least was written so well. Anyway, let's get on with the final episode, which is animated, because I guess someone decided to tape over William Hartnell's final moments as the First Doctor. I'm also thinking about watching the 12th Doctor's final episode after this, because it is a crossover between the First and the 12th Doctor, and we get to see an actual regeneration scene for William Hartnell, so I'm curious as to how that intersects. I'll make my decision after this next episode. The 10th Planet, Episode 4. To my great relief, that was not the final moments of the First Doctor, and he does reappear in this episode. He mentions that this old body of mine is wearing a bit thin, and I immediately remembered the 11th Doctor being old and saying the words wearing a bit thin and went, Ugh. He does state it might also be the cause of some outside influence, and given that, you know, the whole premise of the danger to humanity in this episode is that Mundas is draining the energy from Earth, you could make an argument that the Cybermen killed the First Doctor, but I think he was just really old. But before he passes, he does show up, he does take control of the situation to the best of his ability, does hatch a plan, and gets Ben and the scientists to play for time in the radiation room, while Mundas inevitably comes to an end. I do like that they realised that the Cybermen were weak to radiation, and therefore decided to start chasing them with radioactive fuel rods. Like, goddamn, that's one dangerous plan. I won't pretend like I understand just how dangerous removing these rods from a radioactive environment with safety suits and everything is, but I do kind of feel like everyone on that base doesn't have long to live after this. Maybe it's not that dramatic, but God damn. But yeah, there's really not all that much to say about the end of his Cybermen plot. I don't remember if it was this episode, I think it was, where they came in and shot the general, so that was the end of him. Ironically, his son does get to survive, we're led to believe, and so the general's own anxieties and fears about that, which almost led him to do catastrophic things, were not even constructive because they were not needed to save his son's life. Good job, General Cutler. Also, he was literally about to execute the Dr. Polly and Ben with a gun, which is kind of, you know, we're already straying away from Doctor Who is a kids show, and it's not even New Who yet. It's not even the end of a First Doctor's era yet, although I guess it is. So yeah, to talk about that, his final moments, I am sad. They were sad. The kind of disquiet that he has in the kind of Cyberman ship with Ben and Polly, when he's like, I have to get back to the TARDIS because he knows he's about to regenerate. And Ben's like, oh, you gotta wear your coat, you'll catch your death. And he's like, oh, yeah, of course. It's like, at this point, it would not matter. And then how he locks Ben and Polly out of the TARDIS while, you know, there's some kind of cryptic camera angles of him walking around and pushing controls in the TARDIS. I wonder if the original intent was meant to be that he requires the TARDIS machinery to help him regenerate or something. All the same, eventually he opens the doors and collapses, and they find him collapsed, and then we've got the iconic scene of his face changing. Like, the camera kind of blurs and it just morphs into Patrick Troughton. I am going to go rewatch the Stephen Moffat final 12th Doctor episode that I can't remember the name of ever, purely because now's the best chance to watch that in order of the First Doctor's life. And also I think it makes sense that, you know, he locks it almost makes sense. He locks Ben and Polly out of the TARDIS. You could argue there's time for the TARDIS to dematerialize and rematerialize before Ben and Polly reach the TARDIS, and that's going to be my headcanon to make that make sense. So, be right back. I'm not going to do like an extensive thoughts on this episode of New Who, but I am going to mention, I might not even watch the full episode, but I am going to mention my thoughts on the relevant bits. Twice Upon a Time, that's the dang name of it. Oh god, this is kind of surreal. I find it charming that they did like the last time on Doctor Who 709 episodes ago thing. I don't love the effect they went for, literally morphing William Hartnell into David Bradley. It was very surreal, especially with the teeth. But it is kind of cool how they recreated scenes from the 10th Planet with new actors and a better budget and modern set and colour. Oh, okay, a fundamental misunderstanding I had. I didn't realise the First Doctor didn't dematerialize and end up wherever the 12th Doctor is. The 12th Doctor appeared at the South Pole? North Pole? One of the poles. Wherever they are, at the end of the 10th Planet serial. I didn't know that. Okay, so it does make sense. The First Doctor just wanders off, and Ben and Polly spend a lot more time hanging out in the cyber ship than I thought they did. Oh, and time stops, okay. By the way, I'm just kind of pausing the episode and recording my thoughts when I have a thought. This isn't normally how I do things, but I think it's more appropriate for a more long-form New Who episode. Alright, I've now watched all of the episode up to the part where Hartnell regenerates, and I loved it, actually. I was grouchy about the entirety of Peter Capaldi's era. I think I'm over that now. I think when I rewatch it, I will enjoy it for all the best parts that it has. And I think Twice Upon a Time is a fantastic episode. And, you know, maybe they lean a little bit too heavily on the First Doctor's kind of like different nature as a character written in the 60s. It works for most of the time, but there's like maybe one or two few too many jokes where I'm like, that doesn't really align with his character. But it can be very tough to do like an interjection of an old story and be like, here's another chapter of it that you didn't know happened, except we're writing it 50 years later or whatever, and it's got lots of fan service in it for like later audiences and stuff. But nah, man, Twice Upon a Time is a fucking solid episode, and I definitely appreciate it more now that I've watched the First Doctor's era and know what it adds to the First Doctor's story. I don't think it's crucial. If you don't want to do Modern Who, you don't need to. You're not really going to miss on anything super important. But if you would like a little extra, a little bit more of a deep look into what the First Doctor might have been thinking going through his very first regeneration, that's something you don't get during the First Doctor's era because a lot of that lore hadn't been written yet. So yeah, I'm glad I did that. But that just about brings us to the end of the First Doctor's era. Took me far too long to get here. I've got to speed up the pace or it's going to be another 20 years before I've watched all of Classic Who. And while that's a good way to spend 20 years, yeah, I'd rather get on with things. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, I do have the entire playlist of thoughts on Classic Who, if you want to go back and listen to anything. And of course, there's always opportunities in the future to revisit the First Doctor if they ever reanimate any of the old First Doctor episodes which are missing, or add some stuff to iPlayer which is missing, so on and so forth. There's extended Doctor Who media. I know Big Finish have a lot of First Doctor stuff. I've actually listened to some of it already. There's novels. There's all that good stuff. But for now, we're going to be saying farewell to William Hartnell, the OG, and yeah. It's obviously not my favourite incarnation of a Doctor just because of the nature of it being the very beginning of the show, but I will always respect the genesis of the character and William Hartnell's portrayal of the character. I am sad to see him go, and I am very excited for the future. I hope you will join me. For next time, we will be continuing with the very next serial, William Patrick Troughton's first story, The Power of the Daleks. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go finish Twice Upon a Time and watch Peter Capaldi regenerate just because it feels wrong to leave him sitting there on that battlefield. I'm going to go and have a nice cry. I'll catch you next time.